Okay, we're going to take some questions. I can start them, and I will remind you that there are 4 microphone administrators roving about the room, and I would appreciate your moving to a microphone if you want to ask a question so that we can make this run rather seamlessly and not stand between you and lunch. So while you're finding a microphone, let me start this off with a question for Steve Watts. That was posed by Johannes de Jong of Cone. Is there a sustainable height limit of a high-rise building? Are there any studies about that?
No. What tends to happen is that the height is either limited by regulation or by income stream. And this goes back to the first point this morning about phased occupancy. And this is particularly relevant in residential towers where you do tend to find after a certain height that it's just not feasible because of the time it takes to actually get that income on stream in several years' time, and the finance charges just outweigh the income.
Thanks. Any of you out there, if you want to ask a question, just stand up. Yeah, there you go.
Hi, this is directed to Steve as well. My name is Erwin Cantor. You made 2 observations that I would appreciate some expansion upon. You said that the skin to floor area ratio of the super tall building was less than the skin to the floor area ratio of the lower rise building, which is sort of counterintuitive when you get on the upper floors where you've got a relatively small floor plate and yet you've got perimeter. Is that because the super tall building had a much larger base than the other building you were comparing it to? And the other question that goes along with it, which you just touched upon as a response, are you saying that these super tall buildings are making economic sense and they're penciling out, or are they indeed trips of ego and fancy?
Okay, the easier point is the first one to answer. First of all, Leadenhall Building and the Shard are both tall buildings. Generally, with height, efficiencies are affected and water-floor ratios are generally adversely affected. Water-floor ratio is all about shape, it's all about size of floor plate. So you're absolutely correct in suggesting that one of the reasons why the Shard has a good water floor ratio is that actually at the base of the building they're very, very large floor plates, so that the average size of the floor plate of that building is something like 17 or 18,000 square feet. So compared to more slender towers, it performs pretty well in that respect. The other advantage it's got, by the way, is some very challenging floor-to-floor heights. So on the offices, for example, is 3.65 meters, slab to slab, 3 meters on hotel and resi. And if you compare that to something in London of 3.8, 3.94 meters, which is more usual for an office sandwich. Sorry, can you just repeat your second point?
I don't believe it. My second point was, are you saying to us that some of these super tall buildings, are they penciling out economically, or is it fundamentally a desire for the owner?
Yeah.
Ego trip.
Yeah. I think one of the features of the last decade has been excess. And you know, of all the buildings you see in the public realm, there are an equal number that pass across my desk, which are flights of fancy, and you can see immediately make no economic or sustainable sense whatsoever. So, you know, for every building we do see proceeding, there are probably 4, 5, or 6 which don't. So what I would hope would be a feature of the next era would be a bit more sense, and as I said, back to basics, so that we do sort of home more in on the fundamentals, you know, of the economics that underpin tall buildings.
So the ones that are going ahead,
Yeah.
are they penciling out?
The Shard it makes perfect sense. The reason why, the 2 reasons why the Shard took so long to get started. One is just the difficulties of getting through planning in London. Second is, with what happened in the world markets, it's just a lack of money. So to actually get the finance in place took time. But as a business case, it makes perfect sense, yes.
Others? There's one in the back, I think.
Hello, I'm Mike McMains with the Chicago Architecture Foundation and Prudential Real Estate Investors. This question is more directed to Dan. Through the tenant research that Jones Lang LaSalle has conducted, to what degree are tenants demanding that they be in a LEED certified building or commercial interior versus just going into a building that has a lot of high performance aspects but don't carry that accreditation?
That's a great question. We're not seeing a lot of demand yet for LEED certification on behalf of tenants, but it is happening. The U.S. government is definitely showing a preference, the GSA, toward a space that is LEED certified. We've seen some big companies, Goldman Sachs, Shell Oil, Fireman's Fund, who are saying they will not lease space in environmentally friendly buildings. And then the question always is, well, how is that measured? How do they, what's the benchmark? And in some cases, lacking any other, they're saying, at least LEED Silver, for instance. You're starting to see some municipalities adopt LEED as a minimum performance standard for new buildings. So it is creeping in, but there's also a recognition that not every existing building is likely to go through the LEED process. So we really think the industry needs maybe a better benchmark for comparing one building to the next.
Yeah, I think we're all waiting for that. Other questions? Yes?
Oh, hi, Carol
Carol.
Willis from Foreign Follows Finance, as well as the Skyscraper Museum. So it's a question for Steve. To what extent is it the bankers, the financiers, who, to what extent do they understand the economic blueprint for the super tall buildings and stand in the way of the projects becoming realized? How much are they the gatekeepers of projects?
I think historically they haven't been, but I think an increasing feature is that they will be. The risk profiles these days are very much different to what they were 5 years ago, and no matter what institution you talk about, whether it's a bank or a sovereign wealth fund or whatever, they look very keenly at the risks of each project, and obviously tall buildings by their very nature involve more risk than their lower counterparts. So I think that will become an increasing feature where the need to convince and help funders understand the business case, yeah.
And how accurately do they understand the economics? The practical program and the payback, how well do they don't?
No, they don't,
Okay.
no.
So whose word did they go by?
Well, ultimately it's the developer's word, and the developer relies on his professionals, including us, to give that message across. I think historically there's been a barrier between the developer's financial and other advisors and the ultimate funder, but now the design team is much more visible to the funders because they want to get into the detail.
Okay. I think you have a question? Yeah.
I have a question about height. I live in Streeterville, and it's on the committee, and when the Spire was considered, as you know, the feds held it at 2,000 feet. How much will the government be involved in terms of the radar systems and aviation and that type of thing for local airports, and keep American buildings within a certain height? Or will they gradually become more like they are abroad as far as no height restrictions?
I'll answer that in terms of London. I don't know in terms of the States. In terms of America, the Shard is a great example. The original blueprint for the Shard was a 400-meter tower. That was reduced to nearer 300 because of the Civil Aviation Authority's requirements for the flight path into London City Airport.
Any of the rest of you want to respond? Garrett? Is that a consideration?
It's sort of the building as it goes through the approval process, definitely it lands there last, and they will have ultimate say over what it is. Fortunately for us, it lies in an area that has no height restrictions.
Okay. I think there's a question in the back.
Garrett, this is Clark Manis. I have a question for you about Philadelphia, having grown up there for a portion of my life. How do you think that the building that you're proposing actually maintains the profile of a city in terms of its urban scale? Because a lot of the buildings that we see across the world in the U.S. Are focused on height, but I'm curious about your discussion with Philadelphia Planning Commission and staff about how that skyline gets shaped, because it's always been identifiable, particularly in the days when I grew up there, when City Hall was the height of it. And I think that that's an important issue to really focus on for this group.
Well, I think the first thing to say is that to say that we had a we had a discussion. I don't know that it was always pleasant, but there was definitely a discussion. And in terms of respecting, there are different scales. I mean, the cities evolve over time. And, Philadelphia had a sort of a historical colonial scale, which was 3- and 4-story buildings. That evolved into 10- and 12-story buildings. And you had sort of the next generation, which was the low-rise, capped off by, I'll call it City Hall at 548 feet. But for a city like Philadelphia to continuously grow, it does need to go vertical. It's landlocked by 2 rivers, and it's, sort of basically landlocked by very old neighborhoods to the north and to the south. So you really can't go beyond that, those 2 areas. So for a city like Philadelphia to grow, it's going to have to go vertical. So in terms of how it respects the scale, well, different parts of the building, for example, the height of the entrance, the lobby to the hotel, that sort of reflects back and is sort of modeled after, the historical colonial scale. The scale of the hotel bridge is sort of modeled after the sort of that mid-rise scale, sort of right around, the City Hall type height. And then, the city's already sort of broken through into the super tall buildings. Comcast Center is 975 feet. Liberty One is at 960 feet. Liberty Two is 940 feet. You have Mellon Bank Center 900 feet. So we're not the first ones there. We are the first ones sort of breaking through the 1,000-foot height barrier. But I think it's just sort of part of the evolution of a city. The scales will always evolve and always change. A lot of that's dictated by technology.
All right, thank you. Any other questions? Yes.
A question for the whole panel, but it's based on the chart that Steve Watts showed that showed the difference from economic forecast to actual results. And as far as sustainability, what is your experience with buildings that are projected energy savings or emissions reductions? Are they actually meeting those goals? Are they exceeding them? Are they falling short? And if it's a case of some buildings do meet or exceed and others do not, what's the difference?
I think that's an excellent question, and the fact that I don't know the answer to that tells you all you need to know. I don't think there is sufficient data actually collected for completed buildings that enables anyone, well, certainly I'm not aware of any data that would enable me to answer that question.
Yeah, there's been a lot in the press lately about some, LEED certified buildings that were not performing well from an energy standpoint, and so I think some do live up to the promise and some don't, and the reasons are some it's flawed design and economics to begin with. I don't think that happens a lot. I think what often happens is it's an operational issue. So we need to be sure that the building operators understand the design concept and maintain the building to perform at that level. There's a whole industry, called retro commissioning, which exists because building operators allow buildings to deviate from their original design concept. So we really need a lot of focus on that. And it all again gets back to what I keep advocating is just more ongoing measurement and transparency so that we can look at the actual performance of buildings and see where these things are deviating.
I think it takes a certain vigilance and commitment from the ownership. Within our portfolio, we've set out goals and we strive to meet them. These are older buildings, that were built in the 1920s. it can be difficult, because I think part of the problem with when you're retrofitting older buildings, you don't really recognize all the problems. You don't know what's behind the wall. You don't know what's going on with the systems. Within a new building, I know, I think one of the JLL buildings, the Bank of America Tower in New York, I know that they were laying out a goal of 3% additional cost, capital cost up front, but a 30% reduction in operating expenses. And from what I understand, they've actually met those goals. So I think for the new buildings, it might even be easier to meet those goals. But you need to have both ownership and tenants that are dedicated to it. If you only have one half of that equation, it's not going to work.
That makes sense. Robert?
Yeah, my name is Robert Lau, Associate Editor for the Council. My question is to Steve. The city's put a lot of time into the approval process and into the zoning issues for tall buildings. Do you think with the great funding that's required to fund tall buildings, do you think that city governments may in some situations get involved in the funding to keep certain projects moving forward and keep them on schedule?
Well, I mean, there have been examples of that around the world where either local or national governments incentivize the development of tall buildings. Jim Mao is an example in Shanghai, Commerzbank in Frankfurt. I think if we were looking at the Shard or Heron Tower or Pinnacle in London, which are three key landmark towers which are proceeding, if in current situation, if a funder looked at those schemes now, they wouldn't put their money forward. You know, turning back the clock 6 or 7 years, if they'd have known it would take them that long to actually get them from inception to actually starting on site, you know, that costs tens of millions of pounds in some cases. It's a lot of money to sink into something, and you know the uncertainty associated with that period of time, forecasting construction costs, forecasting tenant demand. It's you know, in many respects they're hostages to fortune. So yeah, I think governments have a part to play.
Any others? Well then, I want to thank our speakers and please. Oh, yes?
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry about that.
That's all right.
A bit of confusion. Okay, my name is Mir Ali. I am with the School of Architecture, University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. I have a question for the two speakers, Mr. Weeds and Mr. Miller. For both the project, the Shard, as well as the American Commerce Center, these are in very ancient cities, and they are in built-up areas. What difficulties did you, not you exactly, but the people who own the building face in terms of, you know, creating these new structures in a built-up area, and also what kind of resistance they faced from the public and maybe from the planning authorities?
I'll start. I think within Philadelphia, for the American Commerce Center project, it was a generational issue. You could sort of draw the line in the sand. If someone in the city was over 50, they were against it. If they were under 50, they were 100% for it. And it was, we actually held, planning presentations in auditoriums like this, and it was overflowing capacity. And we had, I almost call them groupies that came out, waving banners in support of the project. And then you had, somebody coming in on life support, who's not going to be around to see groundbreaking, who's against it. You almost have to. You have to answer the questions delicately. I can't say this, this was not for my particular project, but this is sort of, a sense of what happens in Philadelphia. I mean, we sort of face all the traditional issues of, we did shadow studies, and you would show the study, and if, 2 inches of that shadow would touch an existing building, they're like, oh, we're against it. And then, we had, there was a condo tower, and this is sort of the mindset that you're battling in Philadelphia sometimes. The developer was doing a presentation for a very high-end luxury condominium that was to be proposed to be built on Rittenhouse Square. And an older gentleman comes up and he says, well, what are you doing to battle terrorism? And I'm sitting in the audience sort of shrugging, that's not really a developer's job. And he's just sort of, jokingly but seriously says, well, we're going to put a surface-to-air missile system on the roof. And the guy just says, oh, okay, that makes sense, and sits down. So I think you sort of need to understand who your audience is. And, for us, it was a matter of the planning process from start to end took, about 15 months. And it was, we laid out a plan that was at first, identify as much consensus as we, create as much consensus as we could in the beginning. But at the end of the day, you can't get everybody for it. There's always going to be impediments and roadblocks to it. So what you then do is you create momentum. And that's what we did. We sort of ran over the people that, got in our way and sort of muscled it through the city council and the planning department. Fortunately for us, we did have support from the mayor, the governor, and the local city council person. So they sort of shepherded through the political process. But in terms of convincing the populace in general, most times they're not going to get it.
London is an incredibly political place in terms of tall buildings. Very, very, very difficult, as I said. Irvine Cellar actually acquired the site in 1998. It took 3 years to get a planning permission. We were then appointed in 2002, and 2 days later it was called in for a public inquiry, which took 7 or 8 months. And if it wasn't for the fact that Renzo Piano charmed the pants off the inspectors, then it would have been even more difficult. And we started on site early part of this year. So it took 10 years to get from site acquisition to actually starting on site. As I say, costs money, creates uncertainty. Views in London were historically very, very polarized. People entrenched in either the pro camp or the anti camp. Many stakeholders to satisfy, the likes of English Heritage and other bodies. And to a certain degree in London, the city was actually given a kick up the backside by the success of Canary Wharf, just out of town. And because before that, tenants were going down to the Docklands, so they had to do something.
So please join me in thanking our speakers. I have a little token of our appreciation for each of them, and thanks for your attention.